Hi, this is Chris Dixon. I'm here with Balaji Srinivasan. This is the a16z podcast. Today, hi Balaji.
Hi.
We are going to, we have a list of topics. However, one of the topics is Bitcoin, and knowing you and me, we should probably just talk about that since that's all we ever talk about.
That sounds good to me.
Okay. So what do you think? So I'm looking at my list here. Now that Mount Gox is settled, what's your sort of assessment of the current state of the Bitcoin world?
I think that'll be viewed as a historical speed bump. Really, I think that Bitcoin is an international phenomenon, and the momentum behind it is just so strong.
What do you see as the key drivers of the momentum?
So, for example, like right now, one metric that we're tracking, right, is the number of users of Bitcoin, right? And if you look at blockchain.info, it's got charts of the number of people who are using wallets. Coinbase has disclosed some numbers. Probably the number of worldwide users of Bitcoin is on the order of like 3 million-ish, maybe 5 million. And so it's still very early days, right? Ultimately, you're going to get to 10 million, then 100 million, then maybe a billion Bitcoin users. And so you've got like room for 1,000x growth left. So it's still very early days in this space.
What would you say to people, though, who say, yeah, the 3 million geeks using it, how are you going to get 100 million normal people using it?
That's it. Well, because to quote Chris Dixon, the things that geeks are doing today, everyone will be doing in 10 years. If we recall, back in 2000, there weren't that many people who had mobile phones.
But what do you think the driver will be? Will it be payments? Will it be store of value in countries that have unstable currencies?
Absolutely. So I think that so the Goldman Sachs report that came out about a few days ago, I think is a really good illustration of what at least one of the first major applications is going to be. So while the report had people who were skeptical about Bitcoin and had people who were positive on Bitcoin, the graphs were pretty interesting. And one of the graphs showed that there's an opportunity for $210 billion with a B in savings for payments going through Bitcoin in the space of retail, e-commerce, and remittances. And so that's a large number. And so that's the kind of thing where, hundreds of billions of dollars as first application is pretty good. So payments, I think, and just reducing credit card payments is one definitely major application for the next few years.
But and so what and what do you think we need as a community? We need to be building to get there. So, for example, one thing Mt. Gox would point to is better compliance / security for sort of custodial services for Bitcoin, better exchanges. Like what would you?
Yeah. So I definitely think there's going to have to be like a U.S. exchange at some point that is, regulated and so on and so forth. In terms of technology, I think that one thing where I've yet to see a really good one, or at least one that I like, is a really good mobile wallet. I think that's a very important component.
Well, that's because Apple bans them.
Exactly, that's right. So you're not going to get them on iOS. And I actually think
Coinbase is an awesome mobile wallet. I have it, but you had to have gotten it before they banned all Bitcoin apps.
Exactly, that's right. So this is actually one of the things I think that is going to actually lead to it's a killer app, right? Like, locking down Bitcoin on the iOS platform is going to be, I think, seen in like 3 years as one of the more short-sighted things that could be done because it's going to be such a big deal. And so it's the kind of thing that could push people off of the iOS platform and towards other things, I think, because it's being banned. But I think
they banned even, it was the website, The Fancy, accepted Bitcoin payments, and they banned them accepting them in their app.
Yeah, because anything that is a route around the 30%, kind of tax is something which is going to be disadvantageous to them in the short term. But there's other ways to monetize, and I think that will be seen as a bad decision in hindsight. But yeah, so I think a really good mobile wallet. So that's why Cyanogen's an investment of ours, right? Like something like that, an open source Android that permitted not just mobile wallets but no app store approvals and so on and so forth. I think Bitcoin.
But Android, the store, they allow Bitcoin.
They do, but you still have to go through an approval process and whatnot for it. Like a totally unlocked phone that also had unlocked payments. I think we're going to see something like that, whether it's Cyanogen's and the Oppa, or whether it's a Firefox OS, whether it's something else. I think there's a real interesting aspect to having an unlocked phone with unlocked payments in the future. So in terms of...
So we need an exchange. We need a killer mobile apps.
Yeah, killer mobile wallet. I would say that and one thing I'm looking at is this sort of like white pages for Bitcoin, right? Like there's a site that just did this. They saw like the tweets that we were putting out and did like onename.io,
Yeah.
and so that's interesting.
What's interesting there is that the data is actually stored in their own in the Namecoin blockchain.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, OneName. Yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah.
This implementation detail. Okay, I didn't
Yeah,
realize.
no, it's in the Namecoin blockchain, and so it's got all the virtues of a distributed blockchain. Yeah.
That's very cool. So the aspect that I was thinking of it as, which is somewhat complementary, was there's all these different social identities that we have. We have Facebook, and we have Google, and we have Twitter, and so on and so forth. And each of these, one thesis is that each of these is going to have so you've got one person, and they spread out into K identities across social platforms. Then each identity, one thesis is that they each spread out into N wallets, and each of these wallets, basically within these systems, it performs like a different function. So, for example, on Twitter, you'd have some wallets, and they'd be used for tipping people. On Facebook, you'd have some wallets and be used for paying friends, like a Facebook PayPal with Bitcoin. With Google, your wallets linked to your Google account would be used to pay your Google storage, or maybe to send money to people in Gmail, and so on and so forth. And so this concept of taking all of your social identity layers and social auths and linking them to corresponding Bitcoin wallets would also be interesting, because then you could just type in on a web widget, find your friend's name, and it would autocomplete with their Google or Facebook or Twitter or whatever profile that you could enter, and you could send them money via BTC, and you never have to see that alphanumeric string, which is not memorable, for their Bitcoin wallet. And you wouldn't even necessarily need to see their Bitcoin wallet, because the service would abstract that away for you and just pay the person, right? So I think some service like that, like a white pages for Bitcoin, is going to be important to make it more accessible to normal people and integrate it with existing social services and bootstrap from that. It also makes it more viral. Bitcoin is inherently viral, like PayPal, like email, like Skype, like Facebook, because when you send Bitcoin to somebody else, you're telling them, download the Bitcoin client, right, to accept Bitcoin. Just like you say, download Skype to do a Skype messaging thing.
Let's talk about the AppCoin concept.
Yeah.
So Naval had, which I think you sort of helped him or co-authored with
Yep.
him, this very interesting blog post, which I think still, like even in the tech community, is this stuff that we were talking about is seen as fringe. I predict that will be seen as a prophetic blog post in 5 years, because one thing we've seen as VCs is a lot of people come into us. So I think of Urbit, Ripple, people coming in with new business models where it's basically open source software / services where the monetization happens through some scarce namespace. So Urbit has sort of a URL like schema. Ripple has their own currency. I think this would apply to Namecoin, for example. If it caught on as an identity system, the currency would go up in value. So it potentially is a new business model on the scale of, which could lead to innovation on the scale of sort of open source software.
So so I think that's actually it's going to be very interesting on a few different levels. One thing I want to just do is just for the benefit of the audience is distinguish and say Bitcoin apps versus app coins. So there's Bitcoin itself. There is the protocol for sending BTC back and forth, and the blockchain and so on. Then there's apps that are built on top of the current blockchain and current mining and so on. So, for example, proofofexistence.com, which uses the blockchain as a notary public, or some of the tipping apps and so on and so forth. Those are apps that are Bitcoin apps. They're using the Bitcoin blockchain. And then using your typology, you've got altcoins like Dogecoin and Litecoin and whatnot, which don't really differ from Bitcoin except in parameters like time between approvals or the number of total BTC that are out there or LTC. Dogecoin does differ in the sense that it's got an infinite amount of Dogecoin, so it's like meant to be less stressed than Bitcoin, but they don't fundamentally differ from it. But the fourth category, so you've got Bitcoin itself, you've got Bitcoin apps, you've got altcoins, and the fourth category of app coins, I think is distinct from Bitcoin apps because A, they're using a separate blockchain, and B, they're implementing a function. So, for example, Namecoin is implementing a function of basically a distributed DNS. And the reason I think app coins are so interesting is that they are a totally new way to do funding, monetization, and exit. That is to say, you can, in theory, have an open source project that is funded by these coins that are being pre-mined, and how would people actually run them, run this open source project? Let's say you've got a server instance, like a distributed Google, a distributed Facebook. Anybody who runs that server instance, in order to access it, you have to pay them a small amount of these diaspora coins, for example, if it's distributed Facebook. And so it becomes more valuable as more people are running this software, and using coins would be a way that it's like not just buying equity in the company, it's also a way to use the services of that company, right? So the reason this is interesting, there's a lot of different angles on this. That's just one angle on how you could use app coins. The reason this is interesting is to relate to something else you posted on recently. It's related to this concept of the full stack startup, but it's like the full stack VC. We'd actually control exits as well as, incorporation. We wouldn't have to, do an exit on Wall Street necessarily. You would be liquid permanently through the mechanism of the app coin. You'd always know the valuation of the company. It would be a public, in a sense, not a public market in the SEC sense, but just public in the sense of a valuation that was assigned by a global market. And there's a lot of interesting aspects about that. It fixes a lot of the pathologies in the system right now.
So last topic we'll talk about, just because it's in the news, is Newsweek's article on Satoshi.
Yes, that was awesome. It was a great launch event for our new version of News Genius. Basically, as readers may know,
it was just it was funny if that Newsweek article had appeared on Reddit, it would have been considered like a third tier Satoshi theory.
Yeah,
but somehow you stamp the word Newsweek on top, and the exact same sort of base of evidence becomes something that people actually. I thought the whole thing was comical. It was
ludicrous, I think, from the beginning, because basically anybody who had a familiarity with what Satoshi had done in his writing and his code and so on. It's almost the inverse of Newton, right? Like Newton had, seen he had published something anonymously, and when people, I'm not sure if it was he who published something anonymously or he'd seen another mathematician, but he said, you shall know the lion by his paw. Right.
Yeah.
That is, there's a famous solution to an equation, and it was clear that the person who was doing it was also a very skilled mathematician.
Yeah,
right?
I think he was talking about it was like Bernoulli's equation.
Something like that. Yeah. That's right. I forget the exact details of it, but this is the inverse of that, right? Yeah. You have somebody who is a very nice guy or whatever, but just does not have anything in his track record.
I thought the only interesting thing to me was the sort of sociological observation that people that don't come from computer science, it would be almost like saying, wow, that guy speaks English. He could have written War and Peace.
Exactly. Exactly. That's right.
Like, people don't realize just how
gradations of talent.
And crypto, for God's sake, is like the ultimate, right? I mean, this is like, there's like 10 people in the world who could plausibly invent crypto at this level. Plus distributed systems, plus like
the
internet stuff. The guy was internet native. Like, clearly he'd been posting online. Like, you had to be internet native to write that thing.
Absolutely. And the thing is, it wasn't just even so. It was cryptography and distributed systems, but it's like so difficult to build a new distributed protocol, given that you're going all the way down to the level of the hash functions and so on, and then all the way up the stack to like timing attacks. And
and you have to game theory it out so many levels, right? Which actually makes me think it had to be a group almost, because like the game theory it out against all the different attacks.
It's really amazing, but one of the things is that I don't think that any of the candidates for Satoshi is the real candidate, because there was a remark that Satoshi made in one of his things where he, rather than saying 6 degrees of separation, like in terms of a social network, he said 6 degrees of freedom. It was a very interesting typo. And that, combined with some other things, makes me think that Satoshi's a physicist by training. He's a quant who worked on Wall Street finance and learned proprietary trading algorithms and so on that way. That's a hypothesis that fits with everything that I know, and I think that's like the most likely demographic for who this guy could be. Anyway,
certainly not that poor man whose life was ruined by
not Dorian. I mean, like the other part about it was the most ludicrous aspect is this guy went to such lengths to keep himself anonymous. He used
his real name.
Yeah, exactly. That he used his real name. It's like the most insane kind of thing.
It's a third tier Reddit theory. Yeah. It's like Deep Throat was actually this guy named Deep
Throat. Yeah, exactly. That's right. But what was it? I mean, like the one thing, my final conclusion on that one, which was pretty interesting, is I was thinking, isn't there somebody at Newsweek who could say that there was some, like an issue here, somebody who knew technology and so on? Then I realized no. There's nobody who was doing technology.
Well, part of it's just their general dismissive view of technology. Like they always call us geeks instead of like computer scientists or something. Like it's just general dismissive view of it, and like we don't actually need to have people on staff who understand it, and we can just publish random stuff,
right?
No corroboration.
And related to this is also one thing I've seen increasingly is there's a very strong distinction between people who can evaluate code or mathematics by actually looking at the symbols and evaluating it versus people who can only evaluate things by personalities and social proof, right? And if you have the former, you don't need a ladder. And if you don't have the former, you rely on the ladder as a crutch. And so that's why, people, it was almost like a dual thing. Not only were they relying on Newsweek, they were just relying on Newsweek's, interpretations of this person and who said it was important to say it was him. Whereas we were just looking at the code and we're like, there's absolutely no way that this guy could be doing it. Anyway. So
Okay.
good.
Thanks.